And what's nice about it as well is that it really breaks down very simply Hasbara Talkpoints, and you go through every one of them and you just shred it to pieces.
But I've been saying that like Zionist hate trained me to write this book.
Because I don't think you'll ever find anybody in the colonizers who hates the Jews but loves the Muslims.
For the vast majority, far better than in Europe, Muslims and Jews in the Arab world got along famously until the advent of Zionism. That as if the US is a pacifist country, as if we have a pacifist culture. We don't understand armed resistance. Look at our movies, look at our video games. Everything is violent. We can't stretch our imagination and see what's happening in Gaza. We can't stretch our imagination. Imagine if that was happening to us and our family and our people.
By the way, this episode has a lot of spoilers. Maybe I should say that in the beginning. Yeah. Sim, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
By the way, I was very excited to receive the email from Hannah to have you over on our podcast. I was actually looking forward for the book to be released on April 22nd. I felt somewhat like Anne Hathaway in the movie The Devil Wears Prada, where she had access to the Harry Potter book before it was published.
Oh,
And
that's amazing.
I must say it's actually one of the fastest reads I've had, partly because we had to do this interview, but also it was an amazing book.
Thank you so much.
I've really enjoyed that you said what a lot of Arabs and Muslims and global South colonized world has always felt, but we're very careful about saying it out loud because then we'd be deemed anti-Semitic or terrorist sympathizer or. But I mean, you laid it out so beautifully, so simply, and I think the title is Genocide Bad. That we can't at any way or shape or form come and say no, this is justifiable. So I've really enjoyed it. I think the only book I've read that was faster than this was The Alchemist, but I was on a plane and it's a short book. So
well, thanks. Yeah, I wanted it to be really accessible, really easy to read. That was part of the brief I was given by Hannah Mushabek, my editor, who asked me to write this. This whole book was actually her idea, and she, wanted me to make something for a younger generation, a new generation, really urgently addressing what's happening in Gaza right now, and to make it really accessible to everybody. You don't have to be an academic to read it.
And what's nice about it as well is that it really breaks down, like I said, very simply, Hasbara talk points, and you go through every one of them and you just shred it to pieces. You just blow it out of the water. Like this holds no water whatsoever. And it's also interesting how the Zionists or the Israeli entity has managed to package their identity and their existence within this fake narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can be very overwhelming to argue with Zionists because they do have a talking point, a comeback for everything. But I've been saying that like Zionist hate trained me to write this book, right?
Yeah.
Like, so when I dove into writing this, it had already been almost a year of genocide because I started it in August of 2024. And I had been on TikTok and Instagram making content about Palestine, about anti-Zionism. And I had just been deluged with thousands and thousands of these Zionist comments and talking points over the course of that year. And I really started to see these patterns of like, they only have so many moves. They only have so many talking points. And once you learn to sort of deal with each one, they've got nothing left. They've got nothing new to say because, like you said, a lot of this is based on a bogus narrative, bogus history, and just this moral illogic that just doesn't hold up once you scrutinize it.
And the one thing as well, you start in chapter 1. Who are you to speak on Israel? And you very eloquently explain that why that is. And what I found is a lot of what you wrote with your Jewish cultural heritage and background. I found it resonating very much with Malcolm X's journey. And what was notable to me was your awareness of the concept of Jewish victimhood. Um, Hold on, where is the part where I had quotes? And it's another thing that struck me in your book. And you wrote, "We focus too exclusively on our own victimhood rather than seeing our suffering reflected in others. We study the Holocaust stripped of context, both the context of centuries of anti-Jewish persecution that led up to it, and the context of the many other genocides enacted by white supremacist colonial capitalists around the world before and since." And there was also the running joke: every Jewish holiday is they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat.
Yeah.
Um, Perhaps you want to take us through your own personal journey into anti-Zionism. What do you think was the starting point for you in the journey of self-reflection, self-doubt, self-awareness to get to where you are today?
Um, so I wasn't raised like super Zionist. I wasn't raised religiously Jewish. We were just more culturally Jewish. We would do holidays with family members, but I had an extended family that was more Zionist. Some of them were conservative Jewish, and they were very involved with Israel. So Zionism was kind of not in my immediate family, something that was really pushed, but it was like just around me. And I didn't understand it. I didn't see the appeal of Israel as a kid. I didn't really care about it. And but there was just this assumption that I should back Israel, that Israel had something to do with me, that it was like protecting Jews worldwide. And I just sort of grew up with those notions, with the notion that Israel had been gifted to the Jews by a benevolent world order after World War II and the Holocaust. And there was just no mention of Palestinians, like any awareness that there were people there who were violently displaced and their land was stolen in order to make this happen. I just had no awareness until about college. When I was in college, I went to a very leftist college, and it was also a very Jewish college. And so I would overhear arguments, at parties between anti-Zionist and Zionist Jews who felt really passionately about this. And so I became aware of Palestinian people. I became aware that there was this other narrative, but I didn't feel like I could figure it out. I didn't feel like I had a horse in the game. Again, I just felt like, why does Israel even have anything to do with me? Um, and then when I was out of college, I was just in a bookstore, and I saw Palestine by Joe Sacco on the shelf, and I picked it up. It's a graphic novel, so you can read. I read it in one afternoon, and it just, I thought, let me try to figure out what I think about all this. And just reading it, it was just so apparent. There's apartheid. And I love that book because it's about a US journalist going there expecting to see this really complicated, nuanced, two sides, both sides are at fault type situation, and just seeing really plainly the power imbalance, and that this is an apartheid state, and it's just undeniable who are the oppressed people here. And so reading that just kind of pulled the wool from my eyes. And then I thought, well, boy, I better read some more books about Palestine, because that's what I do. I'm a booktuber. I had a booktube. I'm an author. I read, I write. So I started reading books by Palestinian authors, like Raja Shahada, Mohammad El Kurd, Rashid Khalidi. And, just the more I read, the more ridiculous Zionism appears. And that kind of took me into becoming, an anti-Zionist activist, which I was, I and another friend founded a JVP chapter, Jewish Voice for Peace. That's a, pro-Palestinian anti-Zionist organization. We founded a chapter here in Houston back in 2021. And so, I've had a Canary Mission profile since then. I've been active since then. But then after October 7th, I've been doing this kind of activism for a while. I just put out a TikTok talking about how if you are saying that you care so much about the Israeli hostages, but you aren't talking about the people of Gaza right now, that is because you are racist. That is because of white supremacy. Read Palestinian books. That was basically the video. And it got 20 million views, and I got this huge following. And that's, sort of how I got this big platform. That's how Hannah Mushabek, the editor of this book, found me, started watching my videos, and ended up inviting me to write this book for Interlink Press, which is the only Palestinian-owned press in the U.S.
I met Hannah. I had an interview with her as well. I'm
Oh,
releasing that.
awesome.
Yeah, and it's crazy that I saw that reel very early on and shared it with a number of people, of course, and I received it, and now I'm interviewing you. How crazy is that? Have you read the Footnotes in Gaza?
No.
That's Joe Sacco as well.
Oh, yeah. Is that was like a sequel to Palestine? I
Yeah, it's
should.
there you go. I have it all. There you go. Footnotes in Gaza. It's actually bigger than
Yeah.
Palestine,
Oh man,
and
I need
it's
to get that
it's
one.
it's Gaza centric. I'll show
Cool.
off a couple of books as we
Okay.
go.
Yes, I've read a lot. I definitely have not read every book about
And
Palestine
he
out
has
there.
he has a third one as well, journalism.
Mm.
I haven't read this. I just bought it because he wrote it.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's great.
but maybe I should. But I don't think this is mostly based in Palestine. There's a lot of Eastern Europe in it as well, and a
Mm.
bit in Palestine, Khan Yunis and wherever. Yeah. The part as well, because you talk about a Jewish victimhood. There was a part where you talk about growing up in urban US,
Rural,
rural.
the
Sorry,
opposite, rural Illinois. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
like I grew
and
up
and
out in the cornfields.
and how that compares with urban Jews
Yes.
who don't have stories of swastikas drawn on their driveways. And one thing you wrote, which was nice, it's a perverse desire for persecution when you've been told all your life that everyone else wants to kill you, but you have zero evidence for it. You start jumping at shadows.
Yeah.
That was it hit the needle right on the head. Um, Another thing that stood out. There's a lot of things that stood out, and I know we're limited on time, so I'll try to bring them all up. But and this is part of the discussions that I've had with several people, and of course, not to downplay the notion of anti-Semitism, but I always found that it's a subset of white supremacy because I
Mm.
don't think you'll ever find anybody in the colonizers, let's call them, who hates the Jews but loves the Muslims, or the Chinese or the Arabs. I mean, and you highlight that in several parts of the books when talking about white supremacy, the white supremacy of Israeli apartheid.
Mm.
And I recall a video for Norman Finkelstein. I think it's on the Robinson Gerhardt podcast. And he speaks about being Jewish in the U.S. and Canada, and it doesn't limit your ability to find work, access to education, place of residence. And he says racism needs to be quantifiable, palpable, and lucid expressions of hate or discrimination.
Yeah. And actually, I quote in the book that the average Jewish American lives well, like their average household income is I think over $200,000. So it's way more than the average household income for any other religious or cultural group like that. So yeah, just this idea that is certainly within the context of the US. Like I said, I experienced sort of interpersonal anti-Jewish hate from kids drawing swastikas on my desk or whatever at school, but not but you, as a white Jew in the US, you don't experience structural anti-Jewish racism. That just doesn't exist anymore. We've in the US, if you're a white Jew, you have access to white supremacy. Now, if you're a black Jew, you're going to, experience structural racism as a black person, and not all Jews are white. But yeah, the and another quote I liked from the book was I think it was David Feldman, a historian who talks about the history of the word anti-Semitism, and he talks about how the establishment of the state of Israel globally fundamentally changed Jews' relationship to power. And certainly within Israel, it's Jewish supremacy. It's a Jewish supremacist state. So there can be no claims of, anti Semitism there.
And even because you touch on this as well later on in one of my favorite, I'm going to keep saying that, one of my favorite quotes or parts of the book. And it's when you say, if you're Palestinian or you love a Palestinian person, or you're an Arab or you love an Arab person, or even if you see Arab people as people, then you have plenty of just cause to despise the state of Israel. And then you go on to say, In fact, it's sort of shocking that there isn't more anti-Jewish hate within the Free Palestine movement. But truly, in years of organizing, I have never encountered any. And I think a lot of, well, not I think, I know a lot of the anti-Israel sentiment that Palestinians and Arabs have towards Israel is linked to the fact that they're occupied by them. I mean,
Yeah.
had they been French, we would have hated them equally, or
And there
not.
was a
Not
long,
I'm not sorry, not
yeah.
hated them equally, but against what they're doing equally. I
And there
don't
was a
think.
long tradition, centuries of friendship and,
Yeah,
peaceful, largely peaceful coexistence. There were some isolated incidents across hundreds of years where violence broke out, but for the vast majority, far better than in Europe, Muslims and Jews in the Arab world got along famously until the advent of Zionism. And in terms of like, there's an idea. One thing I did, a story I didn't include in the book, I talk about how we ended up starting JBP here in Houston, but I didn't mention that uh, I talk about how it came out of, there was this like Houston Jews Against Racism group that I was invited to. And and it was 50 people, and only one friend and I wanted to talk about Palestine. And we're like, if we're going to be anti-racist Jews, we have to talk about Palestine. No one else wanted to talk about it. We ended up getting kicked out of the group. But this was in 2021 during the Sheikh Jarrah protests. And that was the run up to, I believe, Israel's Operation Guardian of the Walls, which was a big massacre and a bombing. And during that time, there were protests. There were, protests supporting Palestine, supporting the protesters in Sheikh Jarrah in Houston, as this Houston anti-racism group was meeting. And we were just like, we should go out as Jews and stand in solidarity with these Palestinians experiencing racism. And there was such a fear in the mind of the other Jewish people, these 50 other Jewish people who were on this giant Zoom call where this all went down. They were so afraid of those types of events are always so anti-Semitic. Anytime there's a free Palestine, what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah is awful, but anytime there's a Palestine protest, it's so anti-Semitic. And that just doesn't exist. I mean, I'm sorry. And I was like, I go to these things. I've been there. I've never seen anyone say anything anti-Jewish. Like, never. And even if they had, and this is something really important I took from Mohammad Kurd's recent amazing book, Perfect Victims. Even if they were being anti-Jewish, you still show up in support of the right thing. Like, especially when it's genocide that we're talking about. Even if someone in the crowd is going to say something anti-Jewish, show up anyways, because it's the right thing to do. Like, that doesn't discount, like, whether or not, certain people or all the people in a protest are, hateful on this other issue doesn't affect the morality of the issue itself, if that makes sense.
yes, it does. Uh,
So yeah.
in the back to the point that I asked before about victimhood, and you brought up Mohammad Al Kurd. I remember an interview he had with Lex Fridman, and he had that interview with Lex before October 7th.
Mm.
And it's a long interview. Muhammad so eloquently, describes about how it is living in Palestine under apartheid, Sheikh Jarrah, and all these elements. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I might be mistaken, but Lex asked him 8 times, "Yeah, but do you hate us?"
Oh god,
And
probably
Muhammad was like sort
exhausting.
of dodging the question, and then in the end he's like, I mean, there is some sort of animosity, but I'm telling you about my childhood. I'm telling you about the guy who came and took our house. Or I forgot his name, thank God. I'm telling you about everything that we live through, and the one thing that Lex, I mean, of course, Muhammad didn't say that, but you can sense it, that the one thing that he kept getting back, yeah, but do you hate us? How do you feel towards us?
It's honestly, it's embarrassing. It's like so cringeworthy.
Yeah.
like a Jewish interviewer like that. Like, the amount that you have to prioritize your own victimhood when you're hearing the story of someone who Mohammed El Kurd had his house stolen from him while his family was living there. Jewish settlers just moved into half of their house and just wouldn't be budged. And for years and years, they lived with this like tenuous situation. These violent settlers just came in their house and sat down. And imagine you're talking to someone who's had this happen to them, and all you can think is, yes, but do you hate the people who did this to you? Do you
Yeah.
hate them? What's in your heart?
And
Like, what's in his heart is irrelevant to the injustice that he's experienced, you
he was
know?
telling him that, they'd send him to the UN to do all these talks.
Mm,
And then he later realized that the reason they sent kids is because Europeans would accept them more, right? They'd be less threatening than if it was an adult Arab talking.
yeah.
Um, one of this part, I can't express that I loved it, but no, hold on. This was you have a chapter where you talk about Hamas, but Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
And what's nice about that specific chapter is that you ended the thought at a punchline,
Mm.
and then you came back and said, this is where I ended it, but then the footage of Sinwar's last moments were released. And then you highlighted how it's a loaded topic. I quote, you said, if I misstep, I risk on one hand being exiled from the Free Palestine movement for the crime of normalization, and on the other hand, landing on a government no-fly list for being a radical terrorist sympathizer. And you go on a
Or worse now that Trump's in office.
yeah, or
I
worse,
don't
exactly.
know.
You go on a profound pop cultural internal debate of man against the machine. You mention your friend Mohammad, who was only a curtain and a quiet baby away from being shot at after a drone killed a barking dog in Gaza. And then how we always side with the human against the machine. You give examples from Black Mirror, Predator, Terminator, Star Wars. You missed The Matrix.
Hmm.
Uh, but also you give examples about fighting the evil empire. You talk about the Hunger Games, Dune, V for Vendetta. You mentioned the PR blunder of the IOF releasing the footage of Sinwar. Um, how was it writing that? Uh,
Yeah, that chapter, like I said, so the whole chapter is responding to the question, but Hamas, or like the Israeli talking point, but Hamas. Like, you're trying to talk about genocide, and they're going to ask you to, do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn, what about the 40 babies? What about, this and that? Things that might be lies, things that might be true, things that might be half truths. So when I first wrote the chapter, it was really short, and I was like, look, this is a derailing tactic. You're trying to talk about genocide, and they're trying to get you to talk about Hamas, which has nothing to do with what like Israel's doing. So just say my tax dollars don't fund Hamas and leave it at that, right? So that's where I ended the chapter. And then I just realized this kind of I'm like being a little cowardly. I'm like not trying to get too into talking about armed resistance and the complexities of anti-colonial resistance and the imperfect nature of anti-colonial resistance. And so I decided I had to, like I said, after I saw Sinwar's death on camera, I just thought, I have more to say about this. I have to write about it. And yeah, so one of the things that I'm taking on in the chapter is this total disingenuousness, that as if the US is a pacifist country, as if we have a pacifist culture. We don't understand armed resistance. Look at our movies, look at our video games. Everything is violent. Everything is self-defense. All of our fantasies in the US, so many of them are just fantasizing about killing people in the name of justice and freedom. And we as Americans, we can't stretch our imagination and see what's happening in Gaza. We can't stretch our imagination. Imagine if that was happening to us and our family and our people, that we wouldn't resist violently like Captain America or fucking Wonder Woman or Katniss Everdeen or Luke Skywalker. And I talk about, and the parallels with Luke Skywalker in Star Wars are very striking because of, just the visuals of how Sinwar at the end is fighting a robot and his arm's been cut off, Um, and the US media and the US political class, they are trying so hard, and they're in such lockstep to say that anyone who could have any sympathy for this kind of armed resistance is just a monster, and this is just terrorism. I mean, what's the difference between terrorism and justified Israel defending itself, state violence? It's that Palestinians don't have a state. Why don't they have a state? Because the entire global community has conspired against them getting a state for over 75 years, for 100 years. So, it's just such bullshit. It's just such bullshit. And I think that, it's scary right now to assert the right of occupied people who are being genocided to use self-defense by any means necessary to defend themselves. It's really scary right now to assert that because, again, like, Trump is deporting people for much less if they don't have citizenship. And that's why I think those of us who do have citizenship and white privilege, or we're Jewish, or and so we occupy this special space in the debate, or maybe if you're in a country where there's a little bit less high stakes around free speech right now, um, it's on all of us to just call out the ridiculousness of condemning any sort of armed resistance to total extermination as terrorism. That's ludicrous.
Um, and it all comes down to white supremacy, no? I mean, if you strip all the layers, that's how I see it. I mean,
Yes, and I talk in the book, and people get really hung up on that because white supremacy, they think white as in just skin color, as in uh pale people, and that's not the definition. So that's not the definition of whiteness that
yes.
really, like, critical race scholars, or in the book I talk a lot about, like, black Marxist scholars use. Whiteness in that case is a construct. It's about creating a class of people that are fully human, and then everyone else gets to be non-human. So, like, I've talked a lot about white supremacy in the context of Palestine, and I get maybe more and less genuine pushback saying, well, some Palestinians are paler than some Israelis. Israel has a very, racially diverse makeup compared to the US. It's not a majority white country in terms of skin color, but Jewishness is the first, like, gate to whiteness
Hmm.
in, in Palestine, in Israel, the state of Israel. And so every Jew, no matter their skin color within the borders of Israel or their occupied territories, has more, like, white privilege than any Palestinian because it's an apartheid state, and that's how it's set up. So
And
some
I
people
think,
get tripped up on that whiteness.
yeah, I felt it was highlighted when he talked about the Holocaust.
Mm,
And it was an amazing part for me. I mean, particularly when you actively taught the Holocaust in schools,
mm,
and just in comparison to other genocides and human catastrophes, Leopold of Belgium, the genocide of the indigenous in both U.S. and Canada, and even Australia, slavery. And you mentioned in a footnote the critical race theory debate, and for critical race theory, many people who are against it are always concerned about how white kids will feel in schools growing up, being exposed to this history. Uh, but then you say that that same approach is not taken with the Holocaust,
mm,
and I like how you broke it down. You said, like, the Holocaust does have an element of supremacy to it, or at least how I comprehended what you wrote. But it's because the Jews were killed by white supremacists, and then they were one of the handful of historical cases that were paid reparations, and were there was a closure to it by white supremacists. And then today they actively became a form of white supremacists as well, sort of like being included in the club of historical genocidal cultural heritage.
yeah, that's the bargain Zionists made.
Yeah.
And and not just Zionists, also, like, many Jews that moved to the US, and this is a whole nother batch of history I didn't really get into in the book, and then I'm not a super expert on, but I know that many Jews in the US came here, and this is starting during the colonial era, saw the US as a place to come to be whiter than they were in Europe, and to experience racial privilege that they didn't have in Europe. So, for example, there were Jewish slaveholders in the South. There were Jews involved in every aspect of, the slave trade, um, here and in Europe. Not more so than Christians. I feel like that's an important caveat. It's not like Jews ran the slavery, but there were Jews who became slave owners in the U.S. In the South, so that they could experience white privilege that was totally closed to them in Christian Europe. And then, like I said, the economics for Jews have been much better here. There was instances of like Jews being pitted against other racial groups throughout history. Now, there have been times there have been Black and Jewish solidarity. So again, this is a complex history in the U.S., but there have been times that that solidarity has not not borne out. So yeah, and Zionists certainly made the decision, starting with their negotiations with the Nazi Party, which there was something called the Hasbara Agreement, where European Zionists coordinated with, immigration officials in Palestine under the British mandate, and got permission from the Nazis to allow Jews to migrate from Palestine from Germany, Nazi controlled Germany, to Palestine, provided that they broke what was a worldwide Jewish boycott at the time that was severely impacting the Third Reich's economy. And they buy all of their goods in Germany to have them transported to Palestine. So yeah, they became buddy buddy with the Nazis. Several Nazi officials visited Palestine multiple times as guests of Zionist Jews. And they saw an opportunity to say, you hate us being in Europe, we hate us being in Europe too. So help us establish a state on these other people's land.
You touch upon an alternative reality of Jews coming to Arabia, and this part resonated with me, being Palestinian Arab as well. And you talked about integrating with the local culture, learning the language rather than impose their own lifestyle and language, and desecrating the land. That's my word. They ruined the environment. You talked about the wall that they built, the planting of European trees, the uprooting of olive trees. And I find that option highly viable. So historically, if you look at how Arabs and Muslims dealt with those who were escaping persecution, you have the Circassians. I think in Arabic we call them Sherkas. They live within their communities and they maintain their. I mean, nobody ever, kicked them out or forced them to learn a language or ask them to integrate with the local culture. If anything, in Jordan, they're benefiting by being the king's personal guard. The Armenians were the last, of course, to migrate. But even historically, the Jews and the Moors from Andalusia, there's an African neighborhood in Jerusalem, but notably, they didn't escape persecution. They were traders and military servers in the state of Jerusalem. So I don't find that reality far off. And, even that the Jews initially were accepted as refugees from Europe, it wasn't until their intention to colonize Palestine was clear that they were refused entry.
Yeah.
And and then you also mentioned that won't anyone think of the colonizers? That's chapter, if I'm not mistaken, 7. What will happen to the Jews? And you give examples of past anti-colonial movements and civil rights movements in the U.S. I think Layla Khalid, who hijacked 2 planes and with 1 casualty, and it was a hijacker. And she was asked the questions after she hijacked the planes. What will happen to the Jews? She said, Jews who want to live in Palestine as equals, not occupiers, will be welcome. And perhaps a more recent quote would be Susan Abu Hawa from her closing sentence in the Oxford debate when she said, you will either leave or you will finally learn to live with others as equals. I think you sum it perfectly in the end of part 2, the last paragraph. By the way, this episode has a lot of spoilers. Maybe I should say that in the beginning. If you believe in principles like equality and justice, then you must believe we're entitled to exactly the same thing as anyone else on earth. And what that means that no, we're not entitled to a homeland, an ethno-state just for Jews, where everyone else is a second-class citizen. If you are committed to principles like equality and justice, then nobody gets an ethno-state. And as a Palestinian, I see that reality of integration and coexistence largely possible with the Jews. Definitely not the Zionists, but even today.
Yeah, you do, even today.
Yeah, I do. I mean, ultimately, it's about rights. It's just, like for the movie Amistad, give us free. Like, no, we don't want,
Well, and it's the only way forward. So I talk about that in the book. Like, can someone who's being genocided turn around and do genocide? Of course, because the Jews are doing it. Like, like we were genocided during the Holocaust, and Zionist Jews are doing a genocide now. So it's possible for that cycle to just keep going on forever. And yes, the only way I see out of it is like full equality.
But I don't think so.
No.
Again, it's in my mind, historically speaking, for the like for if you look at throughout history, the concept of genocide is mostly something that started out of Europe.
Mm.
It
Well,
I mean, if you look at history, specifically the global South,
yeah.
you do have a couple of examples
I don't know.
in
Look at the
Japan and in China. I can
no,
get,
but look
but
at the ancient world. I mean, you got the look at everything that was going on in the ancient world. There was a lot of
yeah, but I mean, like,
it wasn't the same. It wasn't industrialized
yeah,
genocide.
but even any
But the
historically
Mongol
speaking,
invasion, I mean, that was
yeah, but I mean, it was an
genocide.
invasion. But again, it wasn't. It was for conquest and land, and then ultimately, the Mongols. It is the only example in history where occupiers converted to the culture of the people they were occupying.
Mm,
Right? They converted to Islam. Like it's not like they eradicated them and moved them, and then everybody was dead. They came, they settled. All right, they conquest, they took the lands, but then they converted. I mean,
mm.
that concept that you want one area of land for one group of people that worship one deity and speak one language and all look the same, it's vastly a European concept.
Yes, that I would agree with that. And just the concept of the nation state,
Yes.
right? That you're talking about the concept of an ethno state where we're going to have just this one ethnicity, just this one religion. That's another thing. Like, certainly there were the Crusades, there were conquests, there were empires going back and forth all throughout the ancient world. But yes, often when you talk about like the religion changing in a place, um, because of it being conquered, there was really not an effort to like go out and convert every single one of the common people that lived there and had all their different diverse ethnic groups and diverse spiritual traditions and religions, because there just wasn't even like roads to get to all those places. It was in the, cities, the urban centers. It was like the nobility and the monarchs and the rulers, like they might be changing religions as different armies would be coming through. But yes, the idea of like a modern nation state, everyone's going to have the same ethnicity, everyone's going to have the same religion. This is like 200 years old.
And even to expand that just slightly, you said the word I wanted to. Oh yeah, you talked about the Crusades. When the Crusades came and they told them these are Christians, they said, "Kill them all, let God sort them out." The
Mm,
famous quote. For
yeah,
them, it was largely driven by, um, you know, race. Even though they came as a Christian force, and then the other element as well is, the Muslims owned the trade routes, the Silk Route and the spice route with India and China for hundreds of years.
yeah,
Nobody ever occurred to him that I'm going to kill them and take it all. It was trade.
yeah.
You buy and you sell. You give and you take. Right? It's that collective notion, and that's why I don't believe that every people who were victims of genocide will eventually turn around and become. I think that's generally a,
Oh,
a
I'm not saying it's inevitable. I'm saying
yeah,
it can happen.
yeah,
And if you set up another ethno state, you know what I mean?
yes, yes,
If you
yes,
create another apartheid, it will just keep going
and
and keep
it
going.
has happened as well. Again, it has happened with the Turks. They have genocided the Armenians, but
Yeah,
that ultimately happened under the notion of nation state. It was a
yeah,
nationalistic movement.
yeah.
So I do agree with that as well. Um, do I have a last thing? Not to spoil your book, but I liked the ending. I'm not gonna spoil it. I liked it, and I can't say that I agree with it. I do very much. You paint a beautiful reality that I think is very much possible, and it's very much in line with the history of the region, without Western influence and revisionism. Um, and I like the Batman reference as well. It was it hit the needle on the head. I think we have enough spoilers, but I highly recommend this book. I look forward to my signed copy.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I'm so glad it, spoke to you and did what we set out to do with it. So
And I saw today, by the way, also, you're going to narrate the audiobook.
that's right. So just today we announced that there is going to be an audiobook, and it's really amazing. Interlink Press, which again, it's a small family-owned, Palestinian-owned press in the US. They have only ever had like one audiobook published before. This one's getting an audiobook because of the amazing amount of pre-orders that the book has already gotten. But the audiobook will be coming a little later because I'm just starting to record it next week. And it'll be read by me. So it's very exciting. So there is an audiobook coming, but we would really encourage people who want to support the book's launch if you can order it in another format before release day, which is April 22nd. All of that, all of those sales that come before the book comes out factor into whether or not it will hit the bestseller list. So we're really encouraging people buy it in multiple formats if you're going to get it on audiobook. If you go to interlinkbooks.com, you can pre-order a deluxe special edition hardcover that has sprayed edges, a bookmark, foil, spot UV on the dust jacket. It's beautiful. If you pre-order it, it's going to come signed by me. And for the hardcover, 10% of sales go to the Middle East Children's Alliance. Now, to make the book as accessible as possible, we're doing the hardcover as a fundraiser, but we're also doing a mass market paperback, and that one is available anywhere books are sort of sold online. If you're outside of the US or Canada, you can pre-order it by going to simkern.com/bookstores. I have a list there of indie bookstores worldwide that are shipping the book in various regions. Some of them are shipping all over the world. So you can go find a bookstore internationally that's closest to you and pre-order through them. And
Is
there's
an
also an
ebook?
ebook. There's an ebook too.
Yeah, about to ask you.
Yeah.
Because I know some people maybe can't read the hard copy.
Yes.
I would
So we're
assume
going to have it all. We're going to have
in the
ebook,
US.
paperback, hardcover, audiobook, all the
And maybe
ways.
get your hands on the book before I sense it'll be banned. I mean, that's
Yeah, I mean, I'm bracing myself, but I tell myself, any kind of shit they throw at me, it's just going to be better publicity for the book. So,
how passionate is your narration gonna be? I look forward
oh,
to it.
you know me. You've seen my videos. I know that they're going to have to tell me like 100 times to talk more slowly because I've like trained myself on TikTok to speak very, very quickly.
Amazing. I look forward to all of that.
Well, thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Sim. Really enjoyed this.